2022 is the scheduled year for the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, if Xi Jinping will not postpone the date or cancel the meeting. Deferring or canceling the 20th National Congress. This is not a future time travel drama, but a conjecture of a certain possibility based on the pattern of history. In 2014, 3 years before the 19th National Congress of the CCP, I speculated from some clues that Xi Jinping intended to govern for 20 years and would not follow the tradition of setting up reserves in the 19th CCP National Congress, and described this roadmap. At that time, no Western analysts had seen this, and Taiwan's friends were laughing at it, but some Chinese friends thought it was possible. Now, 3 years later, the 19th National Congress of the CCP is over. The fact that Xi Jinping's intention to stay in power for 20 years has become a global consensus. Analysts in the West and the East have begun to debate two questions. Can he do it? If so, where will he take China? In 2014, Chinese experts did not see or believe Xi Jinping's 20-year ambition to govern. Not because they did not know enough about the CCP, but because they are too eager to understand the details of the Communist Party's political struggle, and almost completely ignored the pattern of history, so they could only use one kind of straight-line view of point for development of China. In fact, this is not the first time that such erroneous analysis has been made under the dictatorship of the CCP. In the period of China's Cultural Revolution, the straight-line view analysts of the consensus is that the CCP has embarked on a path of self-destruction and reached the conclusion that tyranny was doomed. Unexpectedly, the CCP made a U-turn and suddenly, under Deng Xiaoping's covenant, "I allow you to make money. You abandon your political rights." China quickly broke away from the line of exporting communism to the world and switched to the US-led track of world order. Hitchhiking for 30 years has made China what we see today. This experience has taught the world to look at the CCP and China should not to fall into the straight-line view, and at a time when the CCP is facing a critical moment of life and death. The U-turn view may be even more accurate. In fact, at the 18th National Congress of the CCP in 2012, although the economy was still booming, the CCP and China had already faced a life-and-death crisis. General Secretary Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao had both said publicly in the media that if they still not face up to it, and it's about to lose the party and the nation. And then in the 19th National Congress in 2017, thus challenge of lose the party and the nation has not been eased, but has become more severe. It can be said that in the next 5 years, if Xi Jinping does not take the surgical and seismic drive to boldness change the direction of the Communist Party and make it last 20 years, Hu and Wen's warning is very likely to become a reality. This is the problem of historical pattern, and it cannot be controlled by any false data or official whitewash. The so-called final moment does not mean the time of the end of the game, but the intersection of the historical pattern, whether active or passive, on one of the roads. 30 or even 100 years cannot have a way back. As the saying goes, have no thus store beyond that village. So, why nail the final moment to 2022? What mysterious year is this? 2022 has nothing to do with fortune-telling and the pushback charts, but only because 2022 is the moment when all Chinese and 90 million communists solve their doubts. At the 18th National Congress, 1.4 billion Chinese have this or that illusion about Xi Jinping. During the 5 years from the 18th to the 19th National Congress, Xi Jinping's actions disappointed reformers and raised doubts among conservatives. However, in 2017, the 19th National Congress, Xi Jinping still leaves enough room for imagination. This imaginary space will be frozen between 2018 and 2022. Once finalized, whether China is on the road to hell or to paradise, or whether it will be thoroughly knocked down and then retraining, there will be no more suspense. Everyone will enter the state of mind of do what you gotta do. And Taiwan will also make a decision that is most favorable to Taiwan at this final moment. At this point in 2018, Putting all sorts of clues into the historical context under observation, we can speculate 2022 final arrival when the three fixed direction of China. The first type of China, fascist China. The report of Xi Jinping in the 19th National Congress was an unprecedented 32,000 words, which took 3.5 hours for reading. But what he really meant was maybe 10,000 words, and the other 20,000 words were due to the compromise of factions. It also shows that, in the 19th National Congress, Xi Jinping had not reached the pinnacle of personal power, as suggested by the outside, especially in Taiwan media. The military power in the barrel of a gun can only be said to be in preliminary stability. The political power in the pen and knife may have reached 70 to 80, while the economic power the macro control has only about 50. As for financial power, money, most are scattered in the hands of the second generation of the Red families, the second generation of officials, and the second generation of rich families. These are about 100 families in number belong the big ones, and about 500 families belong the small ones. It is not too bad for Xi Jinping if he can direct control over 20 or 30% of them. The weakness of Xi Jinping's power lies in the money, and its threat was manifested in 2018. Guns pla, pens united front propaganda at home and abroad, and knives political, legal, public security intelligence are all centralized in the system, thus facilitating centralization of power through various personnel and organizational reforms. Only the financial money, in essence, is unpredictable currency liquidity. Here today, tomorrow can be over there, it is difficult to centralize the power. To put it figuratively, finance is like the key in traditional Chinese medicine. Finance is a kind of qigong. People who have not practiced qigong, even if they have 6 muscles, are just a big fool. As mentioned above, China's economic rise over the past 30 years has been a hitchhiking to the US-led World Economic and Trade Order. This free hitchhiking is the financial system that goes deep into the global fabric. And the system has itself into a monster. Now even the perpetrator of the United States are difficult to control it. Let alone the follower is China. The financial system has penetrated the fabric of the entire Chinese economy in a very distorted way for more than 30 years. From the state to senior officials to intellectuals to the people in the market, no one can get rid of its path dependence. At the moment, the people playing with the rules of the game, which twisted the system, are not in the Xi Jinping's group. Instead, the anti-corruption campaign of the past 5 years, known as the crackdown on corruption, has put the group of juggling finance in a much more cryptic state. Xi Jinping cannot fail to deal with the huge number of financial players scattered throughout the country, or else he has no chance of winning. However, because of the scattered, liquid, and obscure nature of finance, the most effective way to deal with opponents is to use the fascist means, using nationalism as an excuse and taking the rich country and strong armed forces as an indicator. Powerful face up every bank, every enterprise, every individual, and strict control of the cash flow, and this time, the pen and the NIFs will be the key tools for critical. At this point, one thing to be reminded of here is that in the past, the regime came from of the guns weapon, and today's China has entered the stage of the regime ends by the finance. Perhaps Xi Jinping himself has not fully seen this yet due to the limitations of his life experience and knowledge frame. But the young aides around him, as long as they are loyal, it is impossible to fail to see this point. Then it depends on how arrogant or magnanimity is Xi Jinping himself. If you understand this point, you will know that the so-called nationalism and rich country and strong army may be a long-term strategy for facing the world. But at least in the short term, in the next 5 years, the main role of these slogans is also a domestic totalitarian tools. In a worst-case scenario, assuming that Xi Jinping cannot quickly correct China's financial distortions within 2 to 3 years and must continue to use fascist means, by 2022, after 20 years in power, the fascist direction is very likely to become China's new normal, such as the compulsory redistribution by force, and the rich spit out the money, then carry out the kind of a like public-private partnership 2.0 from the 1950s, and the whole society reshuffles. The second type of China, family monopolized China. At present, the financial and even assets of China are largely controlled by the families of the second generation of the red, the second generation of the government officials, and the second generation of the rich. These families are about 100 from the largest to 500 from the smallest. Without a clear understanding of this wealth pattern with Chinese characteristics, it is easy to misunderstand that China's economic future lies in the hands of the young entrepreneurs who regularly appear in the Western media and ring the bell of the New York Stock Exchange. China's economy and wealth are a field of powerism, and anyone who uses capitalist logic to infer China will eventually stumble on this misunderstanding. In China, the vast majority of the wealth of the more than 1 billion young people without background in Western accounting calculations is held by the rich and powerful people, and they want to run away with load of cash when they have the opportunity. In 1991, after the near death of the Communist Party in Tiananmen Square in 1989, Deng Xiaoping stabilized the communist regime with 2 treaties of the Deng's Covenant. First, the party allows you to make money, and exchanges political rights and freedom of thought with you. Second, the one-party dictatorship changed from the Maoist centralization to the horizontal decentralization of the Standing Committee and vertical decentralization of the central local authorities. However, in the powerism China, the cost of doing so is corruption of dividing the stolen goods. In recent years, it has been proved that Deng's covenant has come to an end. What Xi Jinping has done over the past 5 years seems to be proposing a new Xi's covenant for the people. If you give me centralization, I will give you a better future without corruption. However, many people are deeply worried that this will lead to a return to Maoist centralization. This is especially true of the second generation of the red, the second generation of the officials, the second generation of the rich, and their gangs, who have become rich by playing tricks on money. In the game of 2018-2022, it is not excluded that the families united to negotiate with Xi Jinping, so that a compromised outcome emerged, cease to struggle between families, regardless of their background, to fully support the Communist Party to keep a one-party dictatorship, but oppose the dictatorship of one person within the party, and then formed the pattern as following. The Communist Party is moving toward a relatively internal democratic and open platform within itself, like a coach shared by many families, and China has gradually moved from party-state to state familization, and divides the territory and resources by the clique of officials and families and gentry. The family and family reach a balance under a competitive game. At this time, traditional kinship, the relationship between the villagers and the students, replaced part of the upper and lower power relations. Although the rule of law could not be achieved, it was still possible for the rule by law to exist among the upper level 2 or 300 million people. At this time in China, there were 2 parallel worlds without intersections, the rich and noble world of 200 million people in the upper class, and the just survived world of 1.2 billion people in the lower class. The amazing high-speed rail system, the airport system, the highway system, and the high buildings and gourmet foods that the world has seen today are sufficient to operate on the upper-class 200 million people in consumption. As for the another parallel just survive world, according to the Chinese's nature of being easily satisfied and fear of disasters, it is only necessary to add and subtract something in the survive area. It's enough to maintain the society's stability. As for how long can a family monopolized China last? 20 years. 30 years. 100 years. Who knows? Frankly, in 20 years' time, when humans has completely entered the world of artificial intelligence, the problems that threaten the survival of humans, countries, governments and families are likely to be totally different from the mix of problems we have today. From the fact of the universal short-sightedness of human nature, people who worry about 20 years from now are already a minority. Let alone the Chinese people who have always pursued the great Chinese social culture, such as, there is wine today and be drunk today, be a monk for a day, and strikes the bell for a day, and it's always anybody who not take it, or it's always anybody who not eat it. The third type of China, half set of Cheng-Jingo or Taiwan experience or one country, multiple HK. For those who are hopeful of Xi Jinping in 2012, the models often mentioned are a Gorbachev model and Lee Kuan Yew model, which was a thing of the past. Those who are still hopeful of Xi Jinping today, especially those Chinese who live in exile and have the feelings of the Republic of China, expect the Cheng Kuo model in Taiwan. However, I personally think that in the short period of 5 years from now to 2022, even if Xi Jinping had the intention, China's environment still falls far short of what Cheng Kuo had when he was in Taiwan. Therefore, I once metaphorized that Xi Jinping was at most a Chiang Kai-shek but late for 50 years. If Chinese observers have to use the analogy of Cheng Kuo, it is only a half set of Cheng Kuo at most. Not to mention Xi Jinping's obsession with red generation, bearing the burden and pride of 9.6 million square kilometers and 1.4 billion people. In any case, he would never accept his historical positioning as anchored on the Cheng family that had defeated and fled to the island of Taiwan. Avoiding the concepts of Chiang Kai-shek or the Republic of China, there is actually another way out, which is to jump directly over Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China and open the door to the Taiwan experience. In other words, that is, directly resorting to the evolutionary experience of the Taiwanese people. Although this idea is somewhat humiliating, it is not completely unprecedented. Taiwan's folk culture and private entrepreneurs have indeed led Deng Xiaoping's reform in opening up. Although heroes should not mention their past bravery, if they had seen the Chinese in the 1980s, it is impossible to forget the days when Deng Lijian's singing soothed the wounds of hundreds of millions of young people in China in the 1980s. It is true that the early Taiwanese businessmen did not lack evil people, but they did stimulate hundreds of millions of startup business entrepreneurs in China. And it was also an indisputable fact. Even the experience of the youth generation reversal that happened in Taiwan over the past decade is also an inevitable path for China in the next 20 years. To sum up, no matter whether we regard the evolutionary experience of the Taiwan people as a positive experience or a negative experience, it can be a reference coordinate for China's next step. Whether this experience is well used, even if it is a one-sided or a biased use, it will depend on whether the leader's arrogance is more than the tolerance, or his tolerance is more than the arrogance. What needs to be specially reminded is that Taiwan as a positive and negative reference coordinate does not have to be spoken out, just reference and follow it to do. In addition, the experience of the Taiwanese people may not necessarily lead to the point of one person, one vote. For example, although the semi-indirect electoral system in Hong Kong is still deteriorating, it can still be learned from it at least right now. One country, multiple HK is also a very practical way. Which of the above three types of China will be formed in 2022? I can only say, God knows. What human can be known more and more by observation is only based on the actions of Xi Jinping from 2018 to 2022. Which one will eventually become the final outcome? It will depend on the ebb and flow of power in the historical pattern. However, the struggles between the arrogance and the tolerance of inside of the leader cannot be also said to be non-critical. Some people might ask, is it possible for the fourth type of China, the CCP, to collapse? Yes, of course. That is certainly possible, but it only happened after the final conclusion in 2022.